Jason Rhodes had always believed that success was something earned through sharp suits, clever deals, and quick decisions. The sharp corner office at Barrington & Co. was his sanctuary, and each morning as he walked through the polished glass doors, he was reminded of everything he had worked for. He had clawed his way to the top of the corporate ladder, proving time and again that he was a force to be reckoned with. But in his mind, there was one thing that mattered more than all: recognition. The elevator ride up to the top floor felt like a victory lap every single day. Jason couldn't help but admire the view of the city through the glass panels: skyscrapers, bustling streets, people rushing to make their own lives, none of them knowing the sacrifices he had made to get to where he was. He had worked tirelessly, long nights, missed vacations, and friendships that had fallen apart as his career soared. But none of that mattered to him. What mattered was his name on the roster, his promotion up the ranks, and the lifestyle it had afforded him. The power he now held over people, the money, the respect, or so he believed. He didn't pay much attention to the other people in the building. To him, they were all tools, either to be used or ignored. The employees who worked in the background, like Peter, the janitor, were mere footnotes in the grand narrative of his life. Peter was nothing more than a fixture in the building, a silent presence who cleaned the floors, emptied the trash, and never seemed to look anyone in the eye. Jason barely acknowledged him. Every morning, as he entered the elevator, Peter was usually there, pushing his cleaning cart with a slow, deliberate pace. Jason would nod briefly, a polite but distant gesture that meant little more than an acknowledgement of his existence. But Jason never gave him a second thought. He had too much on his plate. Meetings, deadlines, clients to impress, strategies to refine. This morning was no different. Jason was rushing to get to a high-stakes meeting with a new client, the kind of meeting that could make or break his next promotion. His mind was spinning with projections and revenue goals, not the unremarkable man standing by the elevator doors. As Jason brushed past him in the hallway, he noticed Peter struggling with a large, heavy trash bag. His hands trembled slightly as he attempted to lift it, but he was no match for the weight. Jason barely slowed his pace. He only looked up for a moment, his gaze drifting dismissively over Peter's weary face. The janitor's eyes were clouded with exhaustion, his once vibrant features now overshadowed by the weight of years spent cleaning up after others. Jason's lips curled into a brief, almost imperceptible smirk. "Pathetic," he muttered under his breath, as he walked on without a second thought. He could feel a sharp pang of pride at his own life, one that was so vastly different from Peter's, filled with success and promises of more. As he entered the elevator, Jason glanced at his watch. He had no time for these trivialities. He was going places. But in the weeks that followed, something began to shift, although Jason didn't yet know it. There was a growing sense of unease inside him, a slight disturbance in the air that he couldn't shake. His sharp mind couldn't place it. Was it the unrelenting pressure at work? The constant grind of competition? Or was it something else, entirely? Jason's meetings had become increasingly tense. His promotions were no longer handed to him easily. The competition had grown fiercer. He couldn't help but notice the younger, more ambitious executives gaining ground. His confidence, once bulletproof, now felt fragile. His reflection in the elevator mirror sometimes caught him off guard. He looked tired, worn down, like the sharp edges of his success were beginning to dull. One particular day, after another exhausting negotiation, Jason found himself standing by the elevator, trying to collect his thoughts. His fingers drummed against the cold metal of his watch, the rhythmic sound oddly soothing. The floor was quiet, save for the distant hum of activity. He was about to head to the break room when he saw Peter again, just like every morning. But this time, something was different. Peter was sitting on the edge of his cleaning cart, a faint but visible bruise across his cheek. His usually steady hands were clasped tightly together, and he seemed lost in thought. Jason couldn't help but feel a flicker of concern, something he had never once considered in all the years he had seen Peter in the building. For a moment, their eyes locked. Peter didn't look away, but there was no bitterness, no resentment in his gaze. Just a quiet weariness, the kind that only comes from years of silently enduring life's hardships. And in that brief exchange, Jason felt a strange twist in his chest. It was fleeting, but it left him unsettled. As the elevator doors closed, Jason shook off the feeling, blaming it on exhaustion. But deep inside, a voice whispered that he was beginning to see the world through a different lens. A lens that wasn't clouded by ambition or pride. He had no idea then, but that brief moment, his passing glance at Peter, the janitor, was about to mark the beginning of a journey that would change everything Jason thought he knew about success, power, and the true value of a person. The following week brought a shift that Jason hadn't expected. The atmosphere at Barrington & Co. had begun to feel different. His usual meetings were far more tense, with high-pressure discussions about future projects and client demands. Despite his growing frustration, Jason had buried himself in work. His usual distractions, his perfectly timed jogs at lunch, his impressive collection of tailored suits, and his careful social interactions were becoming less satisfying. A gnawing feeling inside him had grown. His reputation felt brittle, and with every email, every call, he could sense the dissonance in his success. Then, the email came. The subject line simply read, "Company-wide meeting, mandatory attendance." Jason rolled his eyes at the title. He was no stranger to these all-hands-on-deck briefings, but they were often dull. He had attended countless such gatherings, only to sit through long corporate speeches that made him feel like just another cog in the machine. His mind wandered during the initial details in the message, skimming the lines as he thought about his upcoming pitch. But one detail caught his attention at the very end of the email. "We are pleased to announce the appointment of our new CEO, Ms. Amelia Barrington." A new CEO. Jason's pulse quickened as he read her name again, trying to place it. Amelia Barrington. It sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite make the connection. As a senior manager, he should have known. But the details of her appointment seemed to come from nowhere, and that in itself left Jason feeling uneasy. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., and he could already sense the undercurrent of change rippling through the company. It made him uneasy. At precisely 2 p.m., the glass-walled conference room buzzed with muted conversations. Jason entered with his usual air of confidence, straightening his tie as he moved past his colleagues. He tried to brush off the strange feeling creeping up on him. A new CEO wouldn't change the course of his career, he told himself. After all, he had worked too hard, climbed too many ladders to be fazed by anyone, especially someone new, but as he settled into his seat, a wave of unease washed over him. He could feel the difference in the room. The employees around him weren't their usual selves. Some were whispering excitedly, others straightening their jackets nervously. The air was thick with anticipation. And then she entered. Amelia Barrington wasn't just another corporate figure. She was a woman whose presence seemed to fill the entire room with a quiet force. Jason couldn't help but watch her as she made her way to the front. Tall, poised, with an elegant but purposeful stride, she immediately commanded the attention of everyone present. The buzz of quiet conversations fell to a hush as Amelia stood at the podium, her gaze sweeping the room. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice clear and authoritative, with just the right hint of warmth. "It's an honor to be here with you all today. I'm excited to begin this new chapter with Barrington & Co., and to work alongside all of you." Her words were simple, yet there was an unspoken strength in them, something Jason hadn't expected from someone who was just taking the reins. Her presence alone made Jason feel small. "Today, I'm not here to talk numbers," she continued. "I'm here to talk about people, and about why we are all here, working together for something greater than just profits and projects." Jason's mind briefly wandered, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Amelia was speaking directly to him. Her every word seemed to slice through the corporate facade he had carefully built. For the first time in a long while, Jason wasn't thinking about himself. Amelia spoke of the company's legacy, of how Barrington & Co. had always prided itself on more than just business. It had been built on integrity, compassion, and respect for every person who walked through its doors. She told stories of how her grandfather had founded the company and how every employee had played a part in its success, regardless of their role. But what truly caught Jason's attention was how Amelia emphasized that the company was more than a building filled with suits and conference calls. It was about creating a space where everyone, no matter their job, felt valued. There was a brief pause, and then Amelia's eyes scanned the room, landing on someone near the back. Jason couldn't see who it was at first. "Peter," she called, her voice warm. "Would you please stand?" Jason turned instinctively, and his breath caught in his throat. It was Peter, the janitor, standing up with a bewildered expression. His uniform was worn, and his face, as always, looked tired. But there was something different about the way he stood now. It was as if, for the first time in years, he wasn't just the janitor. Amelia smiled as she motioned to Peter. "This is Peter. He's been with us for over 2 decades. He is a key part of this company, and we wouldn't be here without him." Jason's mind raced. He watched as Peter gave a slight nod, his face flushed with what could have been embarrassment or humility. Jason had always written Peter off as someone who just did his job and disappeared. He had never once considered the possibility that Peter might be more than just a face in the background. But Amelia's words hung in the air, and Jason couldn't ignore the growing sense of discomfort. She spoke of Peter's role in the success of Barrington & Co., how he had worked tirelessly to ensure the office was clean, organized, and welcoming for every client that walked through the door. She shared a story about how Peter's dedication had helped the company land a critical deal years ago, when a client had been so impressed by the pristine state of the building that it had played a role in their decision to sign the contract. Jason, felt his stomach churn. He had mocked Peter countless times for his position, his unassuming nature, his silence. And yet, here was Peter, standing before everyone as a man whose contributions mattered. Jason could hardly breathe. His world, which had been so neatly divided between the successful and the invisible, was collapsing before him. As Amelia continued, Jason's gaze remained fixed on Peter. The weight of his own arrogance, his own blindness, pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He could feel the walls he had built around himself crumbling, revealing the truth he had never wanted to face. The truth was simple. Success was never about what title you held. It was about what you gave to the world and who you were when no one was watching. Jason had spent so long fighting for recognition that he had failed to see the people who were already making a difference. And now, as Amelia Barrington's words echoed in his mind, Jason knew that his life was about to change, whether he was ready for it or not. The days following Amelia's meeting felt like a slow unraveling of everything Jason thought he knew about success. He couldn't shake the image of Peter standing there in front of the entire company, honored and acknowledged for his work. Jason had always prided himself on his ability to compartmentalize his life. Work was work, personal life was personal. But now, it felt as though those compartments were beginning to collide. His thoughts lingered on Peter during every meeting, every call. It was as if the janitor's quiet humility had become a mirror, reflecting Jason's own flaws. The more he thought about it, the more Jason realized how little he had understood about what it meant to truly contribute to something. To add value not through your title or your job description, but through your character, your reliability, your heart. Jason had never questioned his belief that titles mattered. He had always equated his worth with the position he held, the salary he earned, the deals he closed. He had lived in a world where success was measured by how many people answered to you, how many were impressed by you. But after hearing Amelia speak so passionately about Peter, Jason couldn't ignore the growing sense of discomfort inside him. His life felt suddenly empty, like a house built on a foundation of sand. The next morning, Jason arrived at work early, as he often did. The office was still quiet, and the soft hum of the air conditioning was the only sound in the otherwise still building. He glanced at the reception desk, where Sheila, the receptionist, was just settling in. Sheila, always bright and welcoming, greeted him with her usual warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Rhodes," she said cheerfully. Jason offered a half smile, but his thoughts were elsewhere. His mind kept returning to that moment in the conference room, when Peter was introduced, the way Amelia had spoken about him, the way everyone had looked at him with genuine respect. It made Jason uncomfortable to realize that he had never seen these people like Sheila and Peter, as more than just the roles they played. Sheila wasn't just a receptionist. Peter wasn't just a janitor. They were people, individuals, whose contributions mattered. Jason walked past Sheila's desk and down the hallway toward the elevator, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. He passed the break room, where he often grabbed his morning coffee. But today, something was different. He noticed the faint smell of freshly baked muffins and coffee brewing. For a moment he hesitated. The janitor's closet was next to the break room, and for the first time in ages, Jason realized that Peter must have been the one who made the office feel so clean, so inviting. The floors were always spotless, the air fresh, the office ready to greet clients with a kind of welcoming that went unnoticed by most. Jason had always taken it for granted, but now it felt different, like a gift he had never truly appreciated. As the morning went on, Jason found it harder to focus. His meeting with a potential client later that afternoon seemed unimportant now, overshadowed by the thoughts of Peter and the way his life had revolved around the wrong things. He found himself doodling on a notepad during the meeting, unconsciously, sketching out a scene of Peter, sweeping the floors, his tired eyes focused on the task at hand. After the meeting, Jason returned to his office, closing the door behind him. He sat at his desk and leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He had spent years chasing a version of success that no longer felt fulfilling. He had been too focused on the external, what other people thought of him, how much he earned, the power he held over others. But now, after seeing how much Peter mattered to the company, Jason realized he had been missing the point. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at a crossroads in his life. Every decision he had made had been driven by an unspoken need for validation. But validation from what? From whom? The cold truth settled in his chest. He had been chasing a hollow dream, and it had left him lonely. Later that afternoon, as Jason passed Peter in the hallway, the janitor paused. His tired eyes met Jason's, and for the first time, there was no avoiding the conversation. Jason stopped in his tracks, feeling the weight of his own inadequacy. Peter gave a small, tired smile, and Jason couldn't help but notice how much older he seemed than he had before. The quiet strength that Peter exuded felt like a reminder of everything Jason had failed to understand. "Morning, Mr. Rhodes," Peter said, his voice calm. Jason nodded, but his thoughts were tumbling over one another. He had to say something, anything to bridge the gap between them. For the first time, he wanted to know Peter's story. He wanted to understand who he was beneath the uniform, the quietness, the lowly status. Jason swallowed hard, the words coming slower than he expected. "Peter, He paused. "How long have you worked here?" Peter raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. 22 years, he said simply, his voice steady. "Started when the building was first built." Jason looked at him, genuinely interested for the first time. "That's a long time. What made you stay?" Peter shrugged, a quiet, knowing smile on his lips. "The work, the people, the routine. It's steady, you know?" Jason stood there, the words hanging in the air between them, feeling suddenly ashamed of his own privileged perspective. For all his accomplishments, all his supposed success, Peter had a life built on consistency, on dedication, on quiet service. And yet, it was Jason who had the title, the office, the recognition. How had he never seen the strength in Peter before? "Thank you, Peter," Jason said quietly, before turning to walk away. Peter's eyes followed him, but he said nothing. Jason didn't need words. He understood now. The real work wasn't about climbing to the top, but about making every step count. And for the first time in his life, Jason realized that Peter, in his quiet humility, had something Jason had always lacked: purpose. The days following his brief exchange with Peter felt like a slow, simmering revelation for Jason. As the sun set each evening, he would sit in his corner office, staring out over the city, but his mind was elsewhere. His thoughts were no longer consumed by strategies or deals. They were filled with a sense of disquiet, an unsettling feeling that he couldn't shake. The image of Peter, quiet, reliable, and steadfast, kept resurfacing in his mind, as if it were some unspoken truth he had been too blind to see before. Jason hadn't realized how deeply ingrained his need for validation had become. He had spent years living by the belief that success came only from external recognition, from promotions, from titles, from the number of people who admired him. But now, the emptiness of that pursuit felt more obvious than ever. The realization cut through him like a jagged blade. He had been chasing after something that was, at its core, shallow and hollow. And yet, the question that lingered was, what now? The office was quieter than usual the next morning. The hum of the air conditioning seemed louder, the usual clinking of coffee cups and scattered conversations absent. Jason arrived early, still processing the whirlwind of thoughts that had consumed him. It was still strange to be reflecting on something he'd always taken for granted. His self-worth tied so tightly to his job and its trappings. As he sat down at his desk, the usual rush of work awaited him. But today, the tasks felt more like distractions than accomplishments. He could feel the weight of Peter's unseen presence hanging in the air, an invisible tether pulling Jason's thoughts back to the janitor's quiet, unassuming life. It was like a mirror that revealed his own shortcomings. Peter had never sought recognition, yet his steady dedication to the work he did had earned him a kind of respect Jason had never experienced. Jason found himself thinking about the people around him, his colleagues, the assistants, the administrative staff. They were all playing their parts in a larger, unseen puzzle. They all mattered, and yet Jason had often only seen them as means to an end. How many times had he dismissed the people who, without realizing it, shaped his day-to-day life? He could remember the countless times he had ignored the receptionist's pleasantries or brushed aside the assistants who did the work that kept the office running smoothly. But what bothered him most was how he had treated Peter. Jason realized, now that every glance of dismissal, every silent judgment he had made over the years, had been rooted in arrogance. It was a mistake he couldn't undo, but it was one he had to come to terms with. He needed to understand why it had taken him so long to see the truth. Later that afternoon, Jason found himself walking down the hallway again. He had no particular destination in mind, just a desire to escape his own thoughts for a few moments. As he passed the break room, he caught a glimpse of Peter again, this time sitting with a small group of other employees. Peter was quietly chatting with a couple of the maintenance crew, and Jason noticed how easy it seemed for them to converse with him. There was no pretense, no hurried thoughts of status or hierarchy, just people talking, connecting, existing. The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. Peter was free in a way Jason had never been. Free from the constraints of status, of ambition, of external expectations. Peter had built a life around authenticity, a life that wasn't measured by a title or wealth. He wasn't consumed by the need to prove himself to anyone. And yet, the company, the building itself, was built on his hard work, his consistency. Jason stopped in his tracks, his chest tightening with a mix of admiration and discomfort. He felt small, unimportant. But in that moment, he also felt something new stir within him, an unfamiliar sense of clarity. As the afternoon wore on, Jason found his mind drifting back to the meeting with Amelia Barrington, the new CEO. Her words had settled deeply within him, more so than any corporate speech ever had. She spoke of people with a kind of reverence that Jason hadn't encountered before. It wasn't about the contracts or the profits. It was about creating a community where every individual mattered, no matter their role. Amelia had seen something that Jason had overlooked for years: the strength in quiet, unrecognized contributions. She had seen Peter's worth, while Jason had only seen the janitor. Jason thought about the way Amelia had treated Peter, not just with respect, but with gratitude. It had been a revelation. She hadn't just acknowledged his role, she had celebrated it, elevated it. And in doing so, she had reminded Jason that true leadership was not about making others feel small to make yourself feel bigger. True leadership was about lifting others up no matter their position. That evening, Jason stayed late in the office. The building was quieter now, the hum of the lights above him almost soothing. He sat at his desk, staring at the same report he had been working on earlier. But the numbers, the charts, the targets, they all seemed irrelevant now. What mattered wasn't how much he could grow the company or increase his bonuses. What mattered was what kind of leader he wanted to be, what kind of person he wanted to be. A sudden thought struck him, sharp and clear. Maybe it's time to start making a real difference. Jason had spent too many years thinking that his worth was tied to his position. But now he understood that true worth came from connection, real connection with people, no matter their role. He wanted to be like Amelia. He wanted to see the value in every person, from the executives to the janitors. But the first step, he knew, was facing the truth. The truth about his own arrogance, his own blind pursuit of validation. It was time to change. Jason grabbed his coat, ready to leave for the evening. But before he walked out the door, he stopped. He glanced at the hallway where Peter had passed him earlier, and for the first time, he didn't feel ashamed. He felt hopeful. Maybe there was still time to make things right. Jason stood at the threshold of his office, staring into the dimly lit hallway. The weight of what he was about to do hung heavily on his chest. He had thought about it 1,000 times in the past few days. What to say, how to say it, whether it would even make a difference. But the realization that had struck him so forcefully, the truth that had been gnawing at him, would not let him rest. He had wronged Peter, the quiet janitor whose life had been far more meaningful than he had ever understood. And now, Jason knew that if he was ever to truly grow, to change, he had to face the consequences of his past actions. The office was empty, save for the soft hum of the overhead lights and the occasional creak of the building settling. He could hear his own breath, shallow and uneven, as he made his way down the hallway toward the janitor's closet. The sound of Peter's cart was faint in the distance. No doubt he was finishing up his rounds, preparing to leave for the day. Jason's steps faltered for a moment, uncertainty gnawing at him. Was it too late for this apology? Could words truly make up for years of neglect? For the moments he had judged Peter as insignificant? His hands felt clammy, his heart racing as he took another step forward, knowing there was no turning back. He approached the closet. He saw Peter through the open door. The janitor was bent over, wiping down the counters with practiced efficiency. His movements were slow, deliberate, his face expressionless as always. But Jason could see it now, the quiet strength in Peter's posture, the dignity that had been there all along, unnoticed by him. "Peter?" Jason's voice broke the silence, and he immediately regretted how hesitant he sounded. Peter paused mid-motion, his head slowly lifting to meet Jason's gaze. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and Jason could see the flicker of recognition in Peter's expression. The janitor didn't say anything, but there was no judgment, no harshness, only a steady calm that Jason had come to associate with Peter over the past few days. Jason's voice caught in his throat. He had rehearsed this, but now that the moment had arrived, the words felt insufficient. "I wanted to apologize," he began again, his tone softer this time, "for how I've treated you over the years, for not seeing you, for dismissing you." Peter remained silent, his expression neutral. He set the rag down on the counter, wiping his hands before meeting Jason's gaze once more. His calmness, the absence of anger or bitterness, struck Jason harder than any confrontation could have. "You didn't see me," Peter said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "I don't expect anyone to. Not many people do, but that's all right." His words were matter-of-fact, but there was an underlying softness to them that made Jason feel even more unsettled. "No." Jason shook his head, his voice thickening with emotion. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have treated you that way. You're more important to this place than I ever realized." Peter met his gaze, and for the first time, Jason saw a flicker of something, maybe surprise, maybe a quiet understanding. "I never wanted recognition," Peter said, his voice steady. "I just wanted to do my part, to do something that mattered." Jason's heart ached. "It matters. You matter." The words spilled out before he could stop them, and the weight of that realization hit him all at once. Peter had lived a life of quiet purpose, without the need for accolades or praise, while Jason had spent his life chasing a hollow idea of success, titles, power, and validation. There was a long silence between them, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Jason didn't know what else to say. There was no way to undo the years of dismissing Peter as insignificant, no way to make up for the judgment he had passed. But, standing here now, with the truth between them, Jason knew that this was the first step toward redemption. Peter broke the silence, his voice low and steady. "I'm not looking for anything from you, Mr. Rhodes. Not an apology. Not anything. We all have our paths to walk." Jason nodded, feeling a lump rise in his throat. He had taken the wrong path for so long, but now at least he could see that there was another way, a way that valued people for who they were, not for what they could do for him. He hadn't realized how much he had been missing until this very moment. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Jason said, the weight of his own guilt pressing down on him. "But I want to do better. I want to change. I can't keep living like this." Peter didn't respond immediately, and for a brief moment, Jason feared he had said too much. But then Peter spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. "Change isn't about the big things, Mr. Rhodes. It's about the little things, the way you treat people when no one's watching, the way you see the world. Jason's chest tightened as he absorbed Peter's words. It was so simple, so clear. Change wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping actions. It was about how you lived each day, how you interacted with others, how you respected them, no matter who they were. "I'll remember that," Jason said quietly. And in that moment, he knew that he would. He had been given a second chance, not just to change, but to make things right. And it started here, with this quiet apology and this unexpected moment of clarity. Peter nodded, his eyes softening just slightly. "I'm glad to hear that." And then, without another word, he returned to his work, leaving Jason standing there, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over him. Jason took a deep breath, his shoulders finally releasing the tension that had gripped him for so long. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But it was a beginning to a new way of seeing the world, to a new way of living. As Jason walked back to his office, his mind was clearer than it had been in years. The world hadn't changed, but he had, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The following week, Jason found himself walking through the halls of Barrington & Co. with a new sense of awareness. Everything seemed different now. The fluorescent lights overhead, the faint smell of fresh coffee in the air, the quiet murmur of voices from the break room. It was as though he had stepped into a world he had long overlooked, where every detail, every face had meaning. His eyes drifted to the reception desk, where Sheila greeted clients with her warm, practiced smile, and to the elevators where the security team offered polite nods as they made their rounds. Jason had always dismissed these people, viewed them as peripheral, as though they existed only to serve his world. But now, it felt as though he were seeing them for the first time. Each of them played a vital role in the smooth operation of the company, just as Peter did with his silent, tireless work. Jason's reflection in the glass walls of the elevator seemed foreign to him now. The man he had once been, obsessed with status and external validation, felt distant. He barely recognized the arrogant, ambitious version of himself who had once walked through these halls, head held high, completely detached from the lives of those around him. But it wasn't just the building that felt different, it was the people. Jason had begun to pay closer attention to the conversations happening in the break room, the little interactions that had always escaped his notice before. He would see Sheila chatting with the office manager, laughing over something trivial, and suddenly, it felt like he was witnessing something beautiful. A simple connection that meant more than any quarterly report. His first meeting that week was with a major client, a meeting he had been preparing for weeks. As he sat across from them, presenting his proposal with the usual confidence, he noticed something strange. For the first time, his mind wasn't entirely focused on the pitch. His thoughts kept drifting to Peter, to the janitor's unspoken strength, to the quiet resilience that had allowed him to work diligently for decades without seeking recognition. The client's words blurred into the background as Jason caught himself. "What am I doing?" he wondered. "This is what matters to me now?" It felt absurd, but the truth lingered in his mind like an indelible mark. He no longer felt the need to be the loudest voice in the room, the one who dominated conversations with numbers and strategies. What he had once seen as essential now felt hollow. The client was impressed with the proposal, but Jason wasn't sure he could find fulfillment in the same things anymore. After the meeting, he sat in his office, staring at his reflection in the glass. He wanted to feel the same thrill, the rush of success, but something had shifted. He was no longer the man who defined himself by his achievements. Now he saw himself in the quiet humility of Peter, in the people who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, and in the subtle but powerful contributions of those who asked for nothing in return. Jason closed his eyes and remembered Peter's words. Change isn't about the big things, it's about the little things. It was simple, yet profound. Jason had spent his life chasing the big things, the titles, the recognition, the awards. But he had overlooked the small things, the quiet gestures of kindness, the everyday acts of service. He had built his identity around being seen, but now he realized that the true measure of a person wasn't how many people noticed you, but how deeply you connected with others. Later that day, Jason found himself walking down the hallway toward the janitor's closet again. His heart was racing, not with fear or anxiety, but with a new sense of purpose. He hadn't expected to find this kind of clarity, this kind of peace, in such an unlikely place. Peter was still there, as he always was, sweeping the floors with a methodical, almost meditative rhythm. The sound of his broom on the floor was the only noise in the otherwise quiet hallway. When Peter noticed Jason standing there, he stopped and raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Rhodes?" Peter asked, his voice as steady as ever. Jason nodded, stepping closer. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The words that Jason wanted to say hung in the air between them, unspoken but heavy. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Jason began. "About the little things, about what really matters. I'm not sure I fully understood before, but I think I do now." Peter nodded without saying a word, his expression unchanged. "I'm not the same person I was," Jason continued. "I've spent too much of my life chasing the wrong things, things that don't matter. I've overlooked people. I've overlooked you. And I've overlooked what it means to truly contribute." Peter stood silently for a moment, his tired eyes reflecting something akin to quiet wisdom. Finally, he spoke. "It's never too late to change, Mr. Rhodes. The hardest part is realizing what needs to change." Jason took a deep breath. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope that, in time, I can make things right." Peter gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Change isn't about making things right with others. It's about making things right with yourself." His voice was calm, but there was an undeniable weight in his words. Jason nodded, feeling a sense of relief settle over him. It wasn't about seeking validation anymore or earning forgiveness. It was about living with integrity, about aligning his actions with the values he now understood. As Jason turned to leave, he couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The days of chasing hollow ambitions were behind him. Now, he understood that true success wasn't measured by how much you earned or how high you climbed. It was measured by how you treated others, by the quiet contributions you made, and by the legacy you left behind. As Jason walked back to his office, a calmness washed over him. The world hadn't changed, not really. But he had. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he was walking the path he was meant to walk. a path that led not to the top of the corporate ladder, but to something far more fulfilling, a life rooted in humility, connection, and quiet, meaningful work.